My name is Ashley Biggs. I graduated 2008 from Loyola with a double major in sociology and psychology. And so while I was at Loyola, I worked a lot with CCSJ. I was a service coordinator for a lot of homelessness programs. And I did some traveling. I did the Jamaican experience twice. I actually went on the first trip that they ever had. And then I led the second one. And I also went on spring break outreach. So I got to be exposed to a lot of different things that touch sociology and kind of what I do now, actually, while I was at Loyola. Before you all got on, we were talking about what our internships were, and mine was actually based at a transitional housing program for women and children. And so I went straight from Loyola to University of Maryland to get my master's in social work. And so my original plan was that I was going to be a community organizer, which I am not, and work in homelessness and housing issues, which I do. So part of it worked out. But when I got to the MSW program, I was exposed to the program with the state called Title 4E. And so how that works is you agree to work in foster care for your second year internship, and the state pays your tuition, and then you work for them afterwards. So since I ended up deciding to go the clinical route instead of the management and community organizing route, I did that program. And so I worked for the state for 3 years, I guess. I did 2 years in foster care and 1 year in child protective services in sexual abuse investigations. And then I moved on to actually go back to kind of housing had always called me. So I worked for the mayor's office of homeless services for a while, doing grant compliance, and then decided I'd kind of had enough of city life and wanted to come back to where my family was. So I moved back to New Jersey. And when I came back to New Jersey, I was looking for a job, kind of really focusing on housing issues. And so I started working for the local Habitat for Humanity. I worked for them for 9 months on a short-term contract position. So they were wrapping up all of their Sandy work still, like 10 years later, 3 years later. They're still working on it now, but it was about 3 years later at the time, I guess, now that I'm doing the math. And so I wrapped up their grants, and I really liked the Habitat program. It addressed the housing issues that I was always passionate about, and I wanted to continue working for Habitat, but the Habitat that I was working for didn't have any openings. So I applied to the Habitat in the next county and was actually hired to be the volunteer coordinator, which was full circle back to my service coordinator days with CCSJ. And so I was a volunteer coordinator for a while. I ran what they call their travel with a purpose trips. So we not only take volunteers on our sites, but we also send them abroad to other countries and to places that have been hit by natural disaster. So New Orleans, Texas, places like that. So I've been there for about 6 years now, and I am now actually the chief of staff at the organization. So I worked my way up from volunteer engagement and then to grants management and then now to administration. So that's what I do now, as well as I do communications actually for local government, because my experience working for the mayor's office and the transferable skills, I think, of psychology and sociology and communication have enabled me to do that. So I do their website and their social media. So I was made chief of staff in January of 2020. So about 2 months before COVID hit. So I was learning an entire new position, but then also have been navigating COVID world for the past 2 years. So it's definitely been an interesting experience and has definitely shaped what we do day in and day out. I'm a Zoom expert at this point, as I'm sure all of you are, but we build typically around 8 to 12 houses a year. During COVID, we actually completed 17 houses, which was really awesome, but it's been a lot of hard work, and we have been very affected in every way that we do business by COVID. So supply chain, we couldn't have volunteers for a long time. Our families couldn't do their sweat equity hours. They couldn't come into the office. they couldn't process their paperwork with us. So we had to get really innovative in how we do business, which we've been able to do. We've been lucky for that. But I think the biggest thing that I would say, if you're looking at a career path in sociology, is that there's so many options. You shouldn't decide on one thing and think that that's like the one thing you're going to do, like I had in my mind, because it turned out to be completely different. And you can change and you can do different things in different capacities. And there's just so many options, and your skills are very transferable. So I would encourage you to experience lots of different things before you kind of settle on the path you want to go down, which I think I have found at this point, but that is about 14 years later. So it took some time and some changes and kind of experimenting in different arenas, but I did ultimately round back to housing and round back to kind of management and programming and operations, which I really like. Like I said, I worked in foster care and child protective services for a while. And for me, the clinical route and the one-on-one with families was just too taxing emotionally over time for me. So plenty of people are very good at it. It was not the place I needed to land. So tried out different things until I found the right spot.
Could you say a little bit more about how you use sociology in your daily life at work?
Sure, absolutely. So Habitat for Humanity, people might be familiar with, not sure the level of. So real Cliff Notes version is that we build affordable homeownership opportunities. So we, at least my habitat, most habitats build in places that don't typically offer homeownership opportunities. So whether that's in an urban area where homeownership is typically really low, or in a suburban area where certain people are priced out of being homeowners. And so we really try in how we make decisions about programming and working with families and where we're going to build, look at all the different aspects of what the needs are for a family or a community and how to address those. And especially recently, we've gotten into doing a lot of work around racial equity. So studying a lot about how the housing market has been very unfavorable to very many people and trying to start to right some of those wrongs.
Then I would ask Dominic if he would say something, and then we'll continue on. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dominic, and so I graduated from Loyola in 2013 with a sociology degree. And since then, I guess it's better if I say it like this first. I started a project when I was at Loyola that was eventually, I applied for a Ovenbach grant to do. And I started that project studying what was going on at middle school that was recruiting kids and preparing them to go to elite private schools in the tri-state area. After I wrote that project and completed it, I kind of had this interest where I said, it looks like there are like a number of organizations that do this, not just middle schools, but whole organizations. And no one talks about these. And so from there, I said, well, I want to follow this track a little bit more and see what's going on here. At the same time that I was doing that, I was thinking about what I was going to do with my life. And being in sociology, studying sociology, actively while I was at Loyola was one of the first times that I saw that bright spot and said, I could do this. I could actually do research. And so I went and I applied to Teachers College, Columbia, in New York City, partially because I said, I need to go to probably the most unequal place in America for schools, if I really want to understand school inequality. And so I knew that was New York City, and I was not wrong. And so I applied to Teachers College, and I got in at the master's level, although I applied for a doctorate. And so I got in at the master's level and continued to scale up that project, where I was now interviewing graduates of one of these organizations who had landed at Columbia, about what their experience was like navigating those programs. And from there, I've scaled the project up a bit further with even more interviews. And also now I'm following a group of kids through one of these programs from middle school to high school. And that's my dissertation right now at Columbia University. I'm talking for a second. Okay, you've come back. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm working on my dissertation and studying these organizations, as well as the lives of the kids that are navigating both moving across race, class, and space for upward social mobility. And what's that like for them to do that? And so that's one of the things I'm doing right now. I'm currently in Los Angeles, where I'm working on another project that I've been hired to do by a consulting firm to evaluate a housing program that's housing insecure seniors. It's built as a homelessness prevention program, and it's a pilot for LA City. And so I was hired with a number of other researchers to evaluate the program to see if it could be scaled up as a possible solution for homelessness in Los Angeles. And they had the rare insight to want to get qualitative information about that, and not just costing. And so that's how I got brought onto that project. And so I'm interviewing seniors right now who've experienced some time living on the streets about this project and how useful it is to their lives or not useful. And so if you'd have asked me if I would have done any sort of consulting work, even just a year before, I would have laughed at you. And I think I'm experimenting with this myself right now and learning a little bit about it. I think some of the things that I thought were right, it's fueled by evil money, but it's fueled by evil money to ask me to evaluate something that could be doing a little bit of good in the world. And so it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so the other thing I'd mention is that I've been highly active in probably one of the most high-profile graduate unions in the country. And so maybe some of you have heard of the Student Workers of Columbia or the Graduate Workers of Columbia, but it's a graduate union that's been fighting with Columbia University for years. And I was elected to the bargaining for that union about a year and a half ago. And so I've been highly involved in that organization as well. And so sociology shapes, of course, my daily work as a sociologist, researcher, but it's also shaped really the way that I approach being involved in the union as well, and thinking about inequality, and thinking structurally about issues like the treatment of graduate workers in universities. And so in terms of how COVID's affected my life and my work, it's greatly affected it. And so when the pandemic began, I was doing field work. Thankfully, my field site for my dissertation is New York City, but that's also the downside of that. It was New York City. And so as I was doing field work and bargaining with the university, everything shut down. And I kind of panicked. The university put all research on hold until further notice. And yeah, I made that face. That was the face that I made. And I kind of panicked. The thing that was the saving grace, though, is that schools had to continue. They had to figure it out. And so this program also figured it out and joined the Zoom universe, where I did a lot of my observations over Zoom and do some interviews over Zoom still. And so it wasn't that much of a loss, but it was a bit of a loss of information and life. There's a big part of what I argued for this project is that you have to follow these kids over the course of their life if you really want to understand what's happening. And there's a blank spot there that I'm still trying to figure out what to do with. And so other than that, it's it's ultimately affected my research, being a graduate student. But those have kind of been the main ways. Even now, I'm really hesitant about going to seniors' homes and interviewing them about their lives. And so it makes me very nervous. But we did postpone this project actually when the Omicron variant started. We were supposed to be here in January. We did back late February because of that. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Can I ask you one question, Dominic?
Sure.
Have you done any teaching while you've been at Columbia?
Yes.
Can you
Sorry.
speak a little bit to that?
I also teach, and I've been a teaching assistant. I teach intro to sociology. And so my favorite thing about that is I get first year undergraduates who are learning about sociology for the first time, as many of you probably did. You came to college and said, "What's that?" And then you sat in a class and said, "Oh, I dig this. I want to learn more about this." And so that's my favorite thing, honestly, is that I, put people on to sociology for the first time in their lives. And so it's very exciting because I know what that did for my life when I was in Dr. Van's class. And so, and teaching, again, was also affected, as I'm sure your professors would tell you about teaching on Zoom. And I'm sure you all have a bit to say about it yourselves as being students on Zoom. And so that was a real challenge. I'm thankfully in a program that gives me a year just to focus on my research. And so this year I haven't needed to teach, but I'll be teaching again next year. And hopefully I'll get to design my own course for the first time. And so that would be really interesting. And so we'll see.
All right, me next. My name is Ciara. I am also the class of 2013. I was a sociology major. I truthfully picked the sociology major at first because they were just the most interesting classes that I was in. There were a variety of other classes that I took that really didn't spark my interest. I never thought of myself as a math science person, so I really really just enjoyed the classes, and that's kind of how I got hooked. I studied abroad in Thailand my junior year. I loved that. It was a really important experience for me in my college career. I think it shaped a lot of independence, and also allowed me to kind of think a little bit more critically about what I wanted to do with kind of the rest of my life, living across the world for 6 months. Then I think another big piece that influenced my career path was the social work practicum my senior year at Loyola, where I learned a bit more about what a social work job would be. It was something that I'd heard about, but I never really had that much direct experience with. I did my internship with, I truthfully don't remember the name of it right now, but it was part of the AmeriCorps program, and it was working with youth who were aging out of foster care and helping them get work experience. I worked in a smoothie shop down at the Inner Harbor, and then did some case management, helping people build resumes and things like that. After school, I worked for a few years at the district attorney's office right outside of Boston. My first year out of school, I worked at one of the highest trafficked courts in Massachusetts, and I did restraining orders and harassment prevention orders all day, every day for a year. And while it was really quite interesting work, I felt burnt out pretty quickly, and I noticed quite a few holes in the criminal justice system that I wasn't comfortable kind of sitting on the side where I was at. So I ended up kind of taking a shift of, I wanted to help people, wanted to kind of be in a role where I was working directly with people, and thought I'd try on healthcare for size a little bit. So I got a job at Beth Israel, which is one of the hospitals in Boston. I was working as a community resource specialist in a cognitive neurology unit. As kind of, I joke that I was sort of like the social worker's sidekick, that like sort of the like paperwork stuff, referring people to community resources, that fell on me, and some more like therapeutic work was the social worker's job. So that was kind of my glaring at me that maybe it was time, even though I didn't love school, admittedly, but it was time that I needed to go back to school to kind of get more knowledge and kind of have a little bit more clarity and direction in terms of what I wanted to do. So I utilized some support from colleagues where I worked, and I ended up going back to school for my master's in social work at Simmons University in Boston. That was a great program. It was something that, I did a lot of research around the area of what was going to be a good program for me. Social work school is not inexpensive, so it was quite a choice that I needed to feel pretty confident in. So I did follow through with that. During my time there, to kind of help pay for things, I worked in a domestic violence shelter. I'd work overnight shifts, nighttime shifts, morning shifts, kind of at any of my free time, which is a really different lens and perspective, but was helpful for shaping some of my work moving forward. My internships in social work school, one was in early interventions. That was working kind of kids who were newborn through 3 years old, supporting kind of families through those developmental milestones. And then my second year, I worked in a domestic violence and sexual assault unit at a local hospital. As you can tell, I was a little all over the place with what I was doing, but it all comes together to where I am now. My first job out of social work school, I worked as a clinician at an eating disorder outpatient clinic. I ran group therapy, I did individual therapy, and I really enjoyed that work. again, it was a pretty taxing environment to work in. And I, after about a year and a half, I made a shift to where I am now and where I plan to stay for the foreseeable future. I'm a clinical social worker at McLean Hospital, right outside of Boston. I worked for 2 years in the inpatient units. So inpatient psych, I was kind of working with adults in all sorts of kind of presentations, age ranges, 18 plus. I was working on inpatient units for anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, trauma dissociative disorders, and then also a geriatric unit. So I kind of ran the gamut of people who I'd come across. Right now, since the pandemic started, I have shifted to an outpatient role, which I'll get to that a little bit more so too. I work now in the McLean's partial hospitalization program. So it's folks who are either stepping down from an inpatient stay or trying to avoid an inpatient stay and need a little bit more support. I think sociology is something that influences my day-to-day all of the time. I'm helping folks navigate some really complicated systems, and I am also a part of a pretty complicated and at times oppressive system. So it's I think I did go to school with a lot of folks who went from a bachelor's in social work to a master's in social work. And I've always really appreciated my background in sociology to kind of have a bit of a wider lens of systems and how they influence other systems and how they impact people. I think it was a really important piece to my work and something that I certainly appreciate day in and day out. The program that I work in actually has a very big research component in itself, where we track a lot of the outcomes of our treatment. Social work is oftentimes considered like the applied science of sociology. So I think it's important that we track sort of kind of where folks come in and where folks go to. The pandemic has certainly impacted my work. I was working inpatient for about the first, I think, year of the pandemic, providing psychiatric care to folks with masks on, really being on the front lines of things. We were having people who were testing positive on our units. I was exposed to COVID quite a few times, getting weekly testing, working with folks who have lost a lot of their social support and connection, and how much of an impact that has on their mental health. We are in the midst of a serious mental health crisis with a lack of providers, people who, the amount of people who I saw over the past few years who had never really touched the system before was pretty significant. So I think that certainly, right now I work from home, which is something I never ever pictured I'd be able to do, working in a hospital for so many years. For so long, my mom on snow days has always been like, are you sure you're going to work? And working in a hospital, you're always going to work no matter what. So this has been different to be able to kind of be at home. I think from a systems perspective, it's been great. I'm able to provide care to people who live all around Massachusetts, rather than just people who have access to transportation and things like that. But kind of on the flip side of things, there's certainly a benefit for people to be able to connect and meet in person that has been taken away by the pandemic. So kind of all things that we're thinking critically about all the time in our work. So that's kind of the long-winded way of where I am today.
Oh, that's wonderful. You three have given us a incredible overview of what your lives have been like since graduating. What I'd like to do now is just open it up and get questions, and students can feel free to just raise that hand or put something in chat, and we'll go from here. But maybe I should also ask, if the professors who are here online tonight would like to ask anything, go right ahead. Michelle, is that you? No. Okay. Ella, go ahead.
I had a question for Ashley. I was curious, when you mentioned like CPS, that piqued my interest. So out of curiosity, like what are the qualifications of that? Because I know that some state employed like jobs, you can just go in with like the level of training that they give you. But I was curious like if it was that way or if there was some other like higher level like academic like college qualifications with your major or whatnot.
So I can only speak for the Maryland system because that's the only system that I worked in. It's, in my personal opinion, a little bit flawed. Yes, you can enter into the foster care child protective system with a bachelor's in just about anything, or you and go through their training, or you can enter in with a master's in just about anything and go through their training, or you can enter in with a master's in social work and go through their training. Really, the only difference in the actual work that you get at that level is how much you get paid. It's, you literally get the same cases as anybody else would get, which I think is a disservice to the families and children. And that's just my personal opinion, but having worked there for a few years, that is my opinion. Once you have a master's in social work, you can go ahead and get your license. Once you get your license, you can get promoted to supervisor. So that's really the difference in the career path in that arena. But yes, you can, I think if you have a bachelor's in psychology and sociology, a master's in those fields, you would be best suited to go into that field. But I do think it is a little bit flawed in how they assign workers to families, because your background might not make you the most equipped to help a family, and sometimes in certain cases it can be more harm than good.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Mackenzie wrote, Ashley and Dominic, how did you decide to go to grad school right away? And how did you decide where?
Dominic, you want to go first?
Sure. So deciding to go to grad school right away really was for me because I had an idea of really what I wanted to do a dissertation about up front, which is really different for most people. But I want to be straight with you. I don't like school. It is really an insufferable process. And I like what I do, right? I like the research I do. I like the topics I study. We just do that in school. And so that's why I'm there. So if you do want to go to grad school right away, I guess I would say to think, about what it is you would be interested in exploring. Don't go just to go. Really don't go just to go. Have an idea of kind of what the goal would be for going. Yeah, I decided on where because I wanted to study education inequality. So I knew I had to go to a major city. So I applied to schools in Chicago. I applied to schools in New York. Yeah, major cities where I knew that they were racially diverse and socioeconomically diverse. Yeah.
So similar to Dominic and Ciara, I do not like school. So I decided to go straight through because I figured if I didn't go straight through, I wouldn't go back. And so I'm glad I did, partially to get it over with, but also partially because I think it was the best way to serve the families that I was working with. And in hindsight, and I also said I would never go back to school, but then I made a liar out of myself because I did go back to school and got a certificate in nonprofit management. And so I think it for me, the reason was to get it over with, quite frankly. But I do think it was a good thing that I did it that way. I wanted to stay in the Baltimore community. I invested a lot of my time and passion in the Baltimore community while I was at Loyola. And so I felt I really wanted to stay there. So I only applied to University of Maryland. And if I hadn't gotten in, I would have stayed and worked in the area. And so that's how I decided to go that route.
Ciara, Lily writes, my aspirations include mental health counseling too. I plan on going to graduate school in a year or two. Before then, I'd like to gain field experience. What do you suggest, since I will be competing with others who have higher degrees? How do I tap into the counseling aspect rather than the research or casework?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there's a lot of moving parts to that question too. A lot of that will be influenced by where you live. I've done all of my work in Massachusetts, and there really aren't counseling opportunities from a bachelor's level. So that's a lot of my work experience. I was observing people who were in counseling roles and being able to talk to people who are in those counseling roles. And I think from a mental health counseling standpoint, we hear a lot. There's a variety of different degrees that you can also get to do that. Like I have a sister who's a psychologist, and we have a very different we had a very different school trajectory. We do very different work. Then I also have friends who are licensed mental health counselors who have also a very different kind of career path, and they do like primarily counseling and individual therapy. So I think my advice would be to talk to different people who have different types of degrees and to get an idea of places where they've worked. I also think kind of thinking about what type of setting you would want to be in. Are you interested in working with kids or adults, or thinking about those types of things. I think with mental health counseling, I right now on the side of my job, I have a private practice where I do individual therapy. So, I was drawn to social work because, to what Ashley was saying, is you can really do so many things with it. So I think talking with other people who have worked in different settings, different licenses, to get an idea of sort of what are the options out there for you, where you want to be.
Can I add something to that too? Don't mind. I don't know, Ciara, if you would completely agree, but I do think that casework is a good entryway to seeing if counseling is kind of really a path you might want to go down. It's like, you're not doing counseling, obviously, and casework is different, but there are some aspects of overlap. And so that's a good way, I personally think, to expose yourself to figuring out if working in that one-on-one setting with people is something you'd be interested in.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think even in individual counseling, the casework doesn't really end. So it's a good skill to have either way.
Right. So Rixie's asking, have you guys ever doubted or regretted majoring in sociology? Do you think there could have been another path or major for you?
I can start. I was actually just having this conversation with my husband yesterday. We were like, if you could go back in time and have any major, what would it be? I think personally, when I was at Loyola, it was most of the people that I was spending time with were business majors. My brother is also a Loyola graduate who was a business major. We have we have very different lives, and I think that at times that clouded my thoughts about things. And sometimes looking back, I'm like, oh, that would have been so. Maybe my life would be so different. I really love the work that I do. I think I've had quite a few opportunities to like pivot off into different directions, and I haven't. I've kind of just gotten deeper into the work. So I wouldn't say I regret it. I do. What I came up with my consensus was that I would have been a biology major if I never had to do math and science. But
Ashley, Dominic, what about you guys?
I don't regret it now. I will be completely honest and say there have been times that I have regretted it, but it was usually because I didn't find myself in the best working environment, or I wasn't in the right position for me. And so I think if you're passionate about it, you're probably on the right path. But there's, like I've said a couple of times, so many options in how you can use it, and you have to find the right one for you. And so, there might be periods of regret, but they didn't stick around, so don't worry.
Yeah, I think if I have any regrets, I think it's just I've become a bit disenchanted with the project that I'm working on. It's not because I don't want to do sociology, it's because I have all these other ideas over here that look really great and I want to do those. And so I think the professors can probably relate to that. But I think the only other field I would be in is outdoor education. And so even before I started sociology, I was really passionate about the outdoors and was considering going into work there. Like, wasn't even going to go to college, was like going to go do that. And so, yeah, I still think about that sometimes. I think I might at least try and find a way to do some of that work still. But for now, I've decided to keep the outdoors for myself. And so I'm the participant on the trip. It's just me. Yeah.
So Mackenzie asks Dominic, if and when you design your own course, what will it be?
I want to do something about culture and education. So I imagine maybe some of you have heard of Pierre Bourdieu in some of your classes, but I want to do some work that really gets people to think also about how race and class are inflected in education, and what we think of as a good student. And so I want to try and design a course that looks over a number of readings about how that happens. And that's really what I do in terms of my work, is I study how schools shape people. It's not as much about how to raise test for me. It's about how schools shape who people are and how they make their lives hard sometimes, how schools make people's lives hard. Yeah, so that's what I want the class to do.
Sounds good. Rixie had a question. Her hand went up.
No, I didn't.
Okay, you're good.
Thank you for sharing though.
There's no more questions in chat. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask now? Or professors that have been biting their tongues?
I just got here.
Grace,
I'll just
go
say
ahead.
hi. I'm going to say hi to those of you who I haven't seen in a while. To those many of you I can't see. Joshua Hendrick,
Grace?
chair of the department. Hi, how are you?
Grace, did you have a question?
Yeah. Ashley, you were talking about how when you were in grad school, can you just go over like you had to work in foster care for 2 years or something? Can you just go over that again?
Sure. So when I first entered you can do this Title IV program, which is unique to Maryland. So I can't speak for any other states if they have similar or not. But you can do it for 2 years or one. I did it only for my second year. So my first year, I was actually placed in a community resource center in West Baltimore. And so I just did some basic casework, referrals, helping people with their resumes, working on programming, stuff like that. And then I found out about the Title IV program during my first year, and really enjoyed working with children and families. So decided to go that route. So how that worked for me, and just doing the program in my second year, was that my 3-day-a-week internship was actually in foster care in a unit, and with other students, which is great. And we had a worker assigned to our unit, and had a unit, I forget what the title was, but like a head of the unit, and one other person that worked with us, and they were all MSWs too. So you were really getting that quality training through that program. And so some of my coursework had to do with families and children. And then, so for every year you took tuition, you had to work for a year. So I had to work for 1 year, but I actually ended up working in foster care for 2, and then working in Child Protective Services for 1. So that's kind of how that program worked. Were there specific questions or just kind of overview?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the overview.
Sure. It was a really good experience.
Any other questions?
I can answer Mackenzie's. Oh, sorry, Michelle, have her hand up.
I was just going to ask, what would you tell your senior self? So if you could go back in time, think back to when you were seniors and you were getting ready to figure out what was next, what would you tell yourself at that point in time?
I didn't.
Did you?
Ashley, you can go.
No, you go ahead, Ciara. You go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think I would tell myself that kind of, while the decision for your next step is important, there's always room to pivot. Like that your first job out of school isn't necessarily your career, and that you can change your mind. Like I still, at this point, feel like I could change my mind. And I actually think one of the perks of a sociology degree, and also some of the work experience, is that I actually do think that a lot of the skills and knowledge shift into a lot of different places. So I think just kind of, while I can feel like, I have to make all these big decisions right away, that there's actually a lot of room for flexibility.
Should I make Dominic go next, or actually go ahead?
Didn't know as much as I thought I did about anything, but the world in particular, my career path, Dr. Van's laughing at me. I thought I knew a lot. And you're always learning, and you're always growing, and you're always changing. And I think that's the beauty of a career in this area is the human race is always changing, and people are always changing, the communities are always changing, and you can grow and learn with them, and really do some good in the world if you are open to being open to learning and changing.
Yeah, it's a little hard. I was taking some time to think. I think one of the things, yeah, I guess one of the main things I would say is the not really that you can really do the work wherever you go. I think I was a little more stubborn about not about New York as much as being stubborn about going to teachers college. I think I was still in a headspace where I said, the best and brightest is all happening right here, and that's just not true. Wasn't true. Still not true. And so yeah, I think yeah, I guess that would be my advice is to really, I think like Ciara said, just keep an open mind. What options we have. Yeah.
So Mackenzie has asked, Ashley, do you think you could have gotten to your current position without going to grad school?
I think anything is possible. There are people that I work with that have a bachelor's degree and are higher than me in the organization. There are people I work with that don't have any undergrad experience and do a really amazing job because of the experience that they have. So I think anything is possible. I do think it helps. I think getting that additional education and learning about the field on a higher level definitely accelerated my path to where I am now.
Any other questions?
I have something else to add of what I would tell a senior year self. Now that I'm thinking about it, is I think one of the things that I wish I did more of was talk to people who were working. Because I don't think even now, like I talk to people in different careers. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that type of job existed or like that field existed. There's people that even I work alongside now who have like really specific interests in training. And I think the more that you can network and talk to people who are kind of already in the working field. And I don't think that, personally, when I got asked to come talk to you folks, like I was excited about that because I was like, oh, this is like, I'd love to share what I'm doing with people. So I think that when I was a senior, I was like, oh, people don't have the time to talk or don't want to talk about what they're doing. But kind of sitting from the working person standpoint, I would talk to people all day long about what I do. So I think reach out to people if you're curious about their job and how they got there, even if it's something that you want to understand more. Don't hesitate to do that because I think you'd actually learn a lot and build some really great connections.
And I think on that same line, Ciara, the skills and the knowledge is really transferable to a lot of different things that you wouldn't think it is. And so if you are really enjoyed the classwork or you're not sure of your next step, like even just trying something, whether it's a part-time job or a job you didn't think would be your next step, there's something to be learned from every experience. And so, as I said before, to just kind of be open to whatever might be next.
Any final questions? All right, looks like they've run out. I wanted to thank all of you for coming and spending time with us tonight and sharing your stories. We've taped this. We'll try and separate it out and put some things on our website so students can hear from you into further years as we go forward. So yes, I appreciate your time. And I think we have had a pretty darn good turnout of students, and I'm very pleased to see this. So, and we've got lots of students telling you thank you, and this was wonderful, and that they learned a lot.
The other thing, Dr. Conradi, is if I won't speak for anyone else, but you're free to share my email with anybody if they have specific questions they think of afterwards. Sometimes we sit through things and like, oh, I wish I'd asked that, and I'm totally open to receiving that communication.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I'd say the same.
Me too.
Okay, great. We'll make your emails available. I don't know that we'll post them on the website, but I'll keep them and I'll give them to Isabel Stevenson, who's doing our administrative work, and she can pass them on to students.
That's good.
I
So-
can send them to the club as well, because I know we have some people who aren't majors or minors who are in the club.
Great. Cool. Okay. Well, then without further ado, we're just shy of 8 o'clock and we know that Ashley has to run off and do another Zoom meeting. So I think now would be the time to say so long, and back at this BAT channel on March 22nd for our second career night. And you three are welcome to attend that if you would like. Yeah, so we will draw this evening to a close. Thank you so much
Good night,
to
everyone.
everyone for coming.